Miri is an artist, a teacher, a science enthusiast, a poet, and an edge walker. She is dedicated to living into her gifts of language and artistic expression as her embodied response to a deep spiritual calling to rewild her environment and live in authentic relationship with the wild and sacred earth. Miri teaches grades 7 and 8 part-time and works on her art full-time. She has had many exhibitions of her work and enjoys facilitating community-based art projects. Recently, she worked with a group of students and residents at Wellington Flats to complete a mural for their entryway. And she's also been involved in an art project with the Women's Interval Home. This year's Walk a Mile fundraiser event will include a collaborative art performance piece created by Miri. Miri is currently enrolled in the Eco Ministry Certificate Program with Seminary of the Wild. So our theme for November is possibility, and Miri's presentation fits well with this theme. Rewilding a way of life. Please welcome Miri Abma.
Good morning. Do you feel that part of you is wild, in tune with the interconnected world? Is there a longing in your soul for a connection with the wild earth? Do you weep at the state of the planet and long for a shift? You are not alone. Eco-philosopher and scholar of Buddhism, Joanna Macy says, a revolution is underway because people are realizing that our needs can be met without destroying our world. We have the technical knowledge, the communication tools, and material resources to grow enough food, ensure clean air and water, and meet rational energy needs. Future generations, if there is to be a livable world for them, will look back at the epochal transition we are making to a life-sustaining society. And they may well call this the time of the great turning. It is happening now. This morning, I am going to share a love story with you. This love story started when I was a child. I loved what I called nature and found it on the edge of Lake Huron and in urban spaces. We had a woodlot behind our house, and there was another one at the riding club just one street over from where I lived. It's all houses now. I loved to walk in the woods. Children had more freedom to roam in those days. I would imagine that there were deer just beyond that fallen tree, or that if I wasn't careful, bears were going to chase me. Another favorite spot was the empty lot down the street. I remember going in there to commune with the birds. My heart was in the wild, so I decided to start a nature club. I wanted to clean up the litter and identify birds. No one else joined my club. Of course, I grew older and other interests took hold. I never lost my love for wild spaces, but I didn't have a lot of opportunities to take long hikes, and I was afraid of the potential dangers that awaited me in the wilderness. So the wild became an abstract concept, one viewed from afar. My story is not unusual. As a species, we have disconnected ourselves from the biodiverse world around us, to the point that we fear wilderness and have worked hard to dominate nature at every turn. But this disconnect is not sustainable. We have arrived at a time of reckoning. It's a difficult place to be. In Indigenous Prophecy and Mother Earth, Sherry Mitchell says, human beings have fallen out of alignment with life. People have forgotten how to live in relationship with the rest of creation. They have lost their respect for their elders in the natural world, trees, waters, soils, and millions of other species that thrived on Mother Earth long before human beings arrived. So how do we move into the future as a species and remain true to who we are and reestablish that lost connection with the rest of the planet, the others who live here, not to mention the soil, the water, the air, all of it? I do not have the answer to that question. But today I will explore one of the threads that we can weave into the fabric of our future. We need to reconnect. We need to love, truly love the earth. And we need to enter into relationship with its fundamental wildness. According to a 2019 Reuters report, between 2001 and 2017, the United States lost 24 million acres of natural area, or the equivalent of 9 Grand Canyon national parks, largely due to housing sprawl, agriculture, energy development, and so on. Every single day, 6,000 acres of open space, parks, forests, farms, grasslands, ranches, streams, and rivers are converted for other uses. In Canada, the total built-up area across the country nearly tripled from 1971 to 2011. This is a complex problem, so there is no single solution. And I am not going to pretend that the things I am talking about today are some sort of magic bullet. But I think that multifaceted, intentional, and scientifically and philosophically driven rewilding is one essential piece of a very large puzzle. The United Nations has named 2021 to 2030 as the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, with the aim to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems on every continent and in every ocean. It can help to end poverty, combat climate change, and prevent a mass extinction, they say. Part of ecosystem restoration is rewilding. Rewilding, according to the World Economic Forum, restores an area to its original uncultivated state, shifting away from the centuries-long practice of controlling and managing nature for human need. It incorporates both the old and the new, allowing wildness to reclaim an area and or incorporating new elements of architectural or landscape design. So for example, there is a plan to link natural habitats across the UK through an intentional, well-planned project to rethink land management. This large-scale project would rewild and restore 25% of the UK. Recognizing that wild spaces are currently shattered and fragmented, they are working toward restoring habitat in such a way that the rewilded spaces are linked together. They note that if every backyard, schoolyard, farmyard, and industrial yard can save a bit of space for nature, we can realize this mission together. Closer to home, we've seen initiatives like the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone National Park in 1995. This was done to bring back balance to delicate food chains. Perhaps more relatable initiative is Bee City Canada's mission, which is to inspire cities, towns, First Nations, schools, businesses, and other organizations to take action to protect pollinators. Do you know, when I drive around Sarnia, I often think about the unrealized potential we have to support pollinators. I look at the great concrete traffic islands and deserted parking lots and imagine if spaces like these could support well-planned wildflower gardens. We know that concrete is a surface that is detrimental to carbon sequestration. Lawns are slightly better. Naturalized gardens are by far the best way to sequester carbon that contributes to climate change. This in addition to benefits to pollinators. Many communities have undertaken initiatives to rewild small spaces like this with great success. And I think about these things a lot because I have seen for myself the effects of ecosystem restoration in my own yard. And I've no doubt that this is a key element of how we can change fundamentally and move forward in communion with Earth's natural system. I first met Larry Cornelis, whom I think you all know, when I was doing research for my art exhibition in my own backyard over 10 years ago. I had conversations with him and Dorothy Teege about native plants and naturalized urban spaces. This was new to me. Up until that time, I had not fully understood that ecologically sound landscaping was far more than filling your yards with plants that look nice. It was even more than refusing to spray herbicides on your lawn and letting nature take its course. It took me a while to come to terms with the fact that my backyard would need a major overhaul. In the fall of 2019, we finally decided to take the plunge. We invited Larry to rewild our yard. We were finally willing to let go of what was there, even the Norway maple with its inky black shade. He could decide how to plant our yard in such a way as to create habitat for pollinators, food for birds, and as much balance as possible. The results were spectacular. Not only could we see almost immediately the impact that changing this one small lot had on the many species that now thrive there. My yard is now a place of wonder and mystery and has become for me a thin place where I have found my deepest connection with the divine. A thin place in Celtic spirituality is a place where the distance between the material and spiritual worlds has collapsed. In her book, Church of the Wild, Victoria Lures writes, mystical experiences in nature, those moments when you sense your interconnection with all things, are more than just interesting encounters. They are invitations into relationship. Beyond caring for creation or stewarding Earth's resources, it is entering into an actual relationship with particular places and beings of the living world that can provide an embodied, rooted foundation for transformation. The global shift necessary to actually survive the crises we've created depends on a deep inner change. What I never saw coming was that my invitation brought me into relationship with, well, insects and arachnids, fungus and worms. The thing about thin places is that time and space feel different when you enter one. My yard is not large, and yet I wander it for hours at a time. This does not add up when I think of it in terms of how many meters I've walked. In my yard, distance can also be measured in terms of a kind of depth of awareness. The best way I can think of to describe it is that when I enter this space, I fall down a rabbit hole, just like Alice in Wonderland. Not only do I enter a different space, I enter into relationship with the others who live there. In her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, botanist and member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, Robin Wall Kimmerer says, paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world, receiving the gifts with open eyes and open heart. I receive this gift every time I enter my yard. I usually wander my yard with my camera in my hand. For the macro lens and the portable microscope I carry allow me to see micro worlds that share this space with me. Openness to this world has unleashed new art, new capacities to love, and a lot of poetry. How do you enter the enchantment and move your aching soul to the wellspring beyond the curtain? Enter the passageway of your slowing heartbeat. Summon the music in your mind to drown out the chatter. Walk the circular path with both intention and abandon. Open your eyes to the minuscule and your ears to the wing words. Feel the north wind raise the hair on your arms and smell the blossom-heavy sensuousness of summer. Taste a raindrop. And suddenly, underneath a dancing leaf or whorled and netted in a pollen bath, you will find yourself here, and you will not be a stranger, for you are known here in this life-laden, shadowy world. It is you who had forgotten it and tamed the tangle of time to suit your longing. But you are ever welcomed back, because by your brave returnings, you extinguish your absences and choose to live. Now, I don't know what my neighbors would think if they really paid attention to me, but I befriend the insects in my own way. In her book, Victoria Lures calls this the courtship of the particular. She says, you don't fall in love with Earth. She's too big. You are allured to pay attention and enter into conversation with a particular being, a particular place. And then through fidelity and time and 1,000 small acts of kindness and reciprocal giving and receiving, you fall in love. Through that particular deepening relationship, a portal is opened and your heart is expanded to love the whole. I get to know individual insects for a time. I talk to them. I tell them how beautiful they are. I ask them permission to take their photos. Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. And I rejoice in their presence. This spring, every day for about 5 days, I would seek out one particular crab spider and talk to her. I would photograph her. I actually mourned when she disappeared. Even now, when I talk about it, I realize how ridiculous it sounds. And yet, as a lived experience, it is perfectly natural. With this kind of relationship, you don't set out to dominate or control the others. You don't have an agenda. You simply show up, slow down, and open yourself, and the miraculous happens. One of the most striking things that happened to me was that I lost my intense and irrational, but very real fear of bees and wasps. I was well known among my family and friends for fleeing whenever anything buzzed anywhere near me. I was so afraid that my blood ran like ice in my veins. This summer, I came to know the bees and the wasps in my yard by observing them and photographing them. I watched in amazement as different species were drawn to different plants and as they sucked sweet nectar out of flowers. Bees with pollen baskets and those with hairy legs that attract pollen were an endless source of fascination for me. Some would overload themselves so much that they had difficulty flying. I came to love the bees. I learned to recognize several native species, many of which are so small, I don't know if I would have even noticed them before. And the bumblebees. I can watch them for hours. I especially love going out early on a midsummer morning to find the bumblebees sleeping, clinging to flowers. Bees like to sleep in. But I came to love the wasps too, even yellow jackets. As long as they had an abundant source of nectar, they had no interest in stinging me. We planted a plant called figwort. This plant has such sweet nectar for wasps that it literally vibrates with hundreds of wasps at a time, most of them yellow jackets. Our neighbor thanked us for planting figwort. He noticed a sharp decline in the number of wasps that bothered him on his patio this summer. Other wasps enjoyed different plants, all of them intoxicated with the nectar. And with the growing love I had for these beings, my fear dropped away completely. I honestly think that they sensed that I love them, for I felt no aggression from any of them all summer and even into the fall. And people now call on me to lead wasps away from them. Philosopher and biologist Andreas Weber, in his book Matter and Desire, says, when you immerse yourself in the natural world, you wander a little through the landscape of your soul. It is indeed soul work to immerse yourself to this degree. When you immerse yourself and pay close attention, you observe those things that most people don't know or only read about in books. I watched as insects cooperated, which they actually did far more often than compete. I noticed that each species of insect had its own favorite plants. Robberflies love zigzag goldenrod, for example. I also noticed that insects, even those who thrived in my nearby tomato garden, took only what they needed, leaving plenty for others. And in the case of tomatoes, only ate from some fruit, leaving more than enough unblemished for us. I noticed that with a balanced ecosystem surrounding it, my American basswood suffered much less leaf skeletonization this year. When insects are properly fed, they seem much less destructive. As I was reading about infestations in gardens near me, mine suffered nothing like an infestation, yet it hosted more insects than ever before. I don't have time to talk about these little ones, but as I keep speaking, I'm going to show you some photos of my new friends. In her book, Finding the Mother Tree, Dr. Suzanne Simard says, I don't presume to grasp Aboriginal knowledge fully. It comes from a way of knowing the earth, an epistemology different from that of my own culture. It speaks of being attuned to the blooming of the bitterroot, the running of the salmon, the cycles of the moon, of knowing that we are tied to the land, the trees and animals and soil and water, and to one another, and that we have a responsibility to care for these connections and resources. ensuring the sustainability of these ecosystems for future generations. Making this transformation requires that humans reconnect with nature, the forests, the prairie, the oceans, instead of treating everything and everyone as objects for exploitation. It means expanding our modern ways so that they complement, build on, and align with Aboriginal roots. Mowing down the forests and harvesting the waters to fulfill our wildest dreams of material wealth just because we can has caught up to us. My attention, and indeed my whole worldview and perspective, was going through a fundamental shift at the same time as my yard was undergoing its transformation. I was experiencing a kind of rewilding of my soul. 2020 was a year of reaching out for me. I felt like I had come upon a threshold in my life and had decided to explore some of the promptings that I was feeling within me. I had felt like my art was at a standstill, and I was feeling frustrated and angry with the direction that so much of Christianity had taken. I decided to seek out new communities to explore the place and significance of art, not only in my life, but in the world itself. I connected with others through artist residencies, book studies, and through the year-long eco-ministry program with Seminary of the Wild. As I near retirement age, I am embarking on a new journey, engaging in meaningful and often difficult conversations, rethinking my sacred calling, reigniting my desire to create art and write poetry, forming lifelong friendships, finding community, and focusing on my own small role in the restoration of this sacred, biodiverse planet we call home. I am forming sacred connections, and this is giving me what I need to do my own small part. Robin Wall Kimmerer says, knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. She goes on to say, we need acts of restoration, not only for polluted waters and degraded lands, but also for our relationship to the world. We need to restore honor to the way we live so that when we walk through the world, we don't have to avert our eyes with shame, so that we can hold our heads up high and receive the respectful acknowledgement of the rest of the earth's being. And so I would encourage everyone listening to follow their inner promptings out into the wild. And I guess that's it. There should be 2 more slides. Are they not on me? Oh, there we go. Just wanted to say, if you're interested in following my poetry and you're on Instagram, I post a new poem every Wednesday under the hashtag Wild Edge Poetry. And these are the 4 of my many books that I've read this year that I think are particularly significant in my journey. So thank you very much for listening.